if you do not know, my name's Olivia Nunes, and I'm the manager. I'm a manager in the Early Years and Childcare Services Division and for the Region of Peel. I'm very happy to welcome you to today's session. We are already in May. I don't know where half the year has gone. And I do know that you guys have a lot on the go right now. So I just really want to express my appreciation for everyone taking time today to be with us on this call. We also want to thank everybody who has submitted, and a good chunk of people have, their 2025 reconciliation and audited financial reporting to us. Thank you so much. The data that we are collecting from you is very essential to help ensure that your funding calculations are accurate. We're going to get into a little bit about more details about that today. And it also helps us kind of inform future funding decisions as well. So thank you for your timeliness. It really is extremely beneficial, particularly this year with a lot of deadlines that are coming down from the ministry, and also to help us inform some adjustments that need to be made to the CWELC program. So keeping with everyone's busy schedules, we plan today's session, as you can see from the title there, to cover two topics. One is the rolling top-up, which is attached to the CWELC program, and the second one is PIRS. So we are we're going to we'll go through the PIRS one first, and then we will talk about the rolling top-up. So before, we're just going to get started with a few of our regular housekeeping items. So as you can see, if you kind of saw it, I'll go across your screen. This meeting is being recorded. We do share the presentation with you. Your microphone is muted unless you raise your hand, and then you put up your hand to ask a question during the question period. This just eliminates background noise and makes it easier for everyone to listen. We do also have the Q&A feature that's been enabled so that you can ask and pose questions because there's going to be a Q&A session throughout this teleconference today. If for whatever reason you cannot ask your question during that, you are welcome to email us at the email address listed there, Earlier Systems division@peelregion.ca, or please contact your early year specialists and they can help you as well. In terms of how to use the Q&A feature, so you'll see there is that little icon that says Q&A, so you want to click that, and then you're going to click the ask a question that's just on your right, I guess, and then you can pose your question there. If somebody else has asked a question that you also have, you can upvote it, and that is helpful for us because it shows us, oh, a lot of people need clarity on this particular topic. So we do, really appreciate it when you use the upvote button or the thumbs up button, because it just helps us understand how popular, let's say, the question is, and it'll help us figure out kind of where to go from there if we need to add any additional clarity or anything. So now, like I said, we're just going to go on to the today's agenda. So first, we're going to be walking you through some PIRS updates related to our equitable access approach and our plan to collect some socio-demographic data from PIRS families. Then we're going to update you with information related to CWELC's and the rolling top-up funding calculation that is part of that. So that part 2 is only intended for providers who received the legacy or growth top-up in 2025. I'm going to repeat this later, but right now, part 1 is for our whole system. So you've all been invited. Then after part 1, part 2 is only applicable to providers who receive either legacy funding in 2025 or they received growth funding in 2025. So if you don't fall into those categories, you are able to sign off after that. So I'll do another little reminder about that when we get to that point in the teleconference. So now, without further ado, I'm going to pass along to Laura Sparling, who's going to get us started on PIRS. Over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Olivia. Yes, as Olivia mentioned, I'm Laura Sparling. I'm the manager of the Early Years Access and Inclusion team, and I'm going to take you through a couple of things, as Olivia mentioned, around PIRS today. The first part is around our equitable access approach, and that only applies to center-based programs that serve children 0 to 4. But later in my presentation, I am going to talk about a couple things that apply to the whole system, like the socio-demographic data collection, and just a review of the new placement and continuous placement process. So yeah, well, we can get right into this here. What we're going to talk about for the equitable access review, this is a brand new approach that we're using for PIRS. It's going to help us assess authentic participation. And it's, as I said, only going to pertain to childcare centers 0 to 4. We're going to implement this beginning in July. So just as a reminder, we can go to the next slide. Thanks, Alicia. As a reminder, you're familiar, of course, with the requirements related to authentic participation outlined in our service provider handbook, but we wanted to include this here because that is just always helps us understand that all providers are required to authentically participate in PIRS and comply with the Memorandum of Understanding, and those are in place to support access, inclusion, participation, and belonging for all children in childcare. That's our baseline, that's our starting point. The equitable access approach that I'm going to walk you through came out because we've noticed that there are a number of programs that have 0 PIRS referrals each year. This is where for a full 12 months, the program has no new children that went through the referral process to be added to an RC's caseload, RC being resource consultant. We don't have a clear understanding of why programs have 0 referrals. So that's making us ask ourselves whether we have some system gaps related to equitable access for children who need additional support. The other piece that I want to mention here is that over the last 2 years, we've had stagnant PIRS referrals. So the numbers are not increasing despite the fact that the system is expanding. So the system's growing. So what that means as a whole is that we're actually serving a lower percentage of children who need additional support than we have historically. So in 2023, that was 5% of the system. Now in 2026, we're down to 3.7%. So we're not serving as many children in terms of the proportional system as we have been historically. So into our next slide, we're going to go through the process. So this gives a high-level overview of the process that we're going to be using for the equitable access approach. We're going to start at the green arrow on the top left of your screen. And so that's the PIRS team. My team is working to help identify programs that have no referrals, and they're looking at our 2024 and 2025 intake data because, of course, we're still in 2026 right now. Once we have those identified, we're going to dig into some of the additional data for those same programs, such as children on caseload, general classroom consultations, how you're using your EPS, etc., to help us get that full picture of support for those programs. In the second step, the conversation step, that's going to take place in July and August. We will be contacting programs who have not had PIRS referrals in the last 2 years. I'm going to get into all the details of the different tiers in the next slide. Programs are going to receive an initial email from us, which will include their referral data and potential dates for a conversation. The conversation is an opportunity to talk about what the data are telling us, the program's perspective, and to learn about any barriers the program might be experiencing related to providing access and supports for families. We'll also use this as an opportunity to review the expectations of participation in PIRS as outlined in that MOU. The third step in the process is action planning. Action plans will be developed by the PIRS specialist on my team. Programs will receive a follow-up call, and email that outlines the actions they are expected to take to support increased access to their program. An example of action plan item could be things like having the RC deliver the PIRS overview presentation to staff, like to your staff in your program, or reviewing the new placement process, etc. And then the final step is where the program would be responsible for actually implementing the action plan. And at that point, September to December, the regional PIRS team will be focusing on monitoring that plan. And so then next we'll go into program identification. So in this slide, we can go through the 3 different tiers of how we will be identifying which programs are going through these reviews and conversations. So tier 1, that's our highest priority. This tier includes programs that have 24 consecutive months of 0 referrals and no active caseload. So 24 months being, again, 2024 and 2025. Once we've completed investigations and action planning with tier 1 programs, we're going to move into tier 2. Tier 2 captures programs that have had 12 consecutive months of 0 referrals and no active caseloads. And for this, we'll be looking at 2025 data. Tier 3 is our lowest priority because it includes programs who have had 0 referrals for 24 consecutive months. So again, 2024 and 2025. But they do have children on caseload. So these programs are actively participating in PIRS. However, even with children on caseload, 24 months without any new referrals does warrant a conversation related to access. And so then we'll go to our next slide about what this means for you. First, it only means something for you if you have a center that falls into one of the tiers I just described. These reviews will apply to a small portion of centers in Peel. It's not the majority by any means. It's really important for me to acknowledge that the large majority of centers do have children on caseload and active referrals. But I want to underline again that point that I said at the beginning around the fact that we're seeing an overall decrease in access for children who need extra support being served in Peel. So back to the steps, July and August will work with you to coordinate time to discuss. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have your participation in the discussions themselves. Then you'll be expected to implement as I walked through on the previous slides. So this work is all part of our ongoing monitoring of PIRS, which is part of our continuous improvement cycle that we've committed to as our ongoing work.
Even the jet, I am being absolutely bombarded by everyone.
Laura, one moment, I'm gonna unmute.
And
Yeah. Thanks, Leisha. Okay, great. So that is the end of just that portion. Now we're going to go into the continued placement and new placement process. So this applies to all providers, not just center-based programs. We thought it'd be a good opportunity to remind you, these are not new. New placement process and continued processes are both existing. Their implementation is an expectation of your participation in PIRS. But the reason we're going through this is because we do find gaps in how these are implemented in our system. Specifically, they come through complaints. So frequently when we're getting a complaint from a family, what's happening is we're not seeing these processes implemented in the way that they're intended. So on to the new placement process. When a family inquires about space in your program and you aren't sure what that will look like or whether you can accommodate the placement, the expectation is that you will follow the new placement process, and that is to help you with your decision making. And you have to do that before you deny a child access to your program. We recognize that there are many reasons that you may not be able to accommodate a child's placement at the time it's being requested. So it's not necessarily that just because you can't accommodate that it means that you're not following or you're not authentically participating, but you do have to go through the new placement process. So from a PIRS perspective, the expectation is that you engage the family in discussions to learn about their child to support you in making your enrollment decision. You also need to engage your RC in a discussion to brainstorm ideas to support enrollment. That's a brainstorm. It is not advice. It's not direction on a placement. And at the end of those steps, if you determine, so you are responsible for making the decision, whether you can accommodate the child's placement or not. If you determine that they can't be accommodated, then you do have to provide the family with the reason that you're not able to enroll their child. And you need to give them info appeals information so that supports them in looking for their care. If a parent submits a complaint identifying that they were denied access to your program, then during our investigation, we'll be asking all parties questions to understand if or how the new placement process was followed. If it was followed, then there'd be no concerns about your authentic participation in PIRS. But what we're finding through complaints is that it's not always being followed. Okay, and then we'll go on to our next slide on continued placement. So same kind of thing with the continued placement process. The expectation is that you follow the steps outlined in the continued placement process before you terminate a child's care. So the difference between the two being new placement process for children who are not yet enrolled in your program, continued placement process for children who are enrolled in your program. So similarly to the new placement process, if a complaint comes in from a family about a child's care being terminated, we'll investigate that to understand the steps that were taken to try to maintain care. That is the goal, which has to happen again before the child is terminated, child's placement is terminated, excuse me. After understanding the actions that took place, we would then be able to determine your program's authentic participation in PIRS. So what this looks like, again, actions with educators, you're collaborating as a team to look at the environment, observations, and put additional strategies in place to support the child's placement. With the family, you're having conversations about the strengths, needs, resources, observations. You would be looking for consent to speak with the RC. And with the RC, you're having those brainstorming discussions, reviewing resources. And again, same as with the new placement process, RCs aren't giving you direction on placement. They're helping you figure out kind of the strategies, et cetera, that you could put in place to maintain the placement. But the ultimate decision about that child's placement is the program's. If continued access can't be accommodated, you do again have to tell the family why, and you have to provide resources like InfoPeel to help explore alternate options. Okay. So those are the new and continued placement process. Now we're going to go into socio-demographic data collection, and then we'll get a little bit of time for Q&A. So with the socio-demographic data, thank you, Alicia, this is something new. So we're in the process of adding this to our intake system. As you might be aware, last year we did have SMD Consulting do a DEI review of our system, and that included a review of our internal policies and processes related to PIRS. As part of that, SMD recommended that Peel add the collection of socio-demographic data into our PIRS intake process. So the reason that it's important for us to collect socio-demographic data is because it will help us better understand the families that we're serving. And it's going to help us do things like identify if we have service gaps or barriers for certain families. We'll also use the data to inform our service planning and any program improvements or policy changes that may be needed. So what's this going to look like? This is going to happen after a family finishes their intake form. So once they hit that submit on the intake form through our system, a survey will pop up with a set of socio-demographic questions. It's not very long. It should only take them about 5 minutes. It is optional and confidential. They only have one chance to complete this though. So it's just that one point at intake that if we get it, we get it, and if we don't, we don't. So we're really hoping that you can help if we're getting any questions, that you can help encourage families, because it is important information to help us with our service planning. So the collection is planned to begin in July. We're going to send you an email to let you know the exact timeline for this to go live. And we're going to give you a few Q's and A's, which are actually in the appendix today, just about like, why are we collecting this information? Where do I go if I have additional questions? Those sorts of things. So you'll see that in the appendix of the deck. And that will support you with any questions that you may get from families. So we would ask that you use the supporting messaging to encourage families to complete the survey, and then redirect anything to the region kind of beyond what you have there. It's just the very baseline questions. We're here for more complex conversations where that's necessary. Okay. So that's it for me. We'll just open it up for a couple questions if there are any.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but we'll just give it a couple minutes. Okay, there's nothing coming through. I see your email there, Laura, and I guess also through EYS and then to your team if there are any questions from providers. So thank you.
Thank you.
And Olivia, I think it's on to you. And I know you were going to reiterate the message of legacy providers, but I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks, Sonia. Thanks, Laura. So, okay. So now we'll take a little bit of a breath, right? And so I'm just going to remind folks that, so if you did not receive like as part of your Gov Grants funding for CWELC, a dollar amount in the budget category is called legacy top up or growth top up, you do not need to be part of this call anymore. You're welcome to stay, but you don't have to stay because this will not apply to you. So with that, we're going to shift gears a little bit, talk about CWELC and talk about the rolling top up. So the rolling top up, I would say, is the last component of the CWELC funding formula implementation. We are going to be talking to you about it in two parts. So today we're really going to cover, what it is, why it's important, and how we're going to calculate it. And in June, we're going to come back and we're going to talk to you about the how, right? Like what you can expect in terms of how we're approaching this. We just want to make sure that everybody has a good understanding of what this is and what to expect, so that you can kind of think about how it's going to apply to your program on a go-forward basis. And because we do have heard and we definitely understand how funding stability and predictability is very important to the sector. So that's why we wanted to kind of divide this into two parts so that everyone had a little bit of time to digest the information and then kind of reflect back on, okay, how do I think my program will be impacted by this? Okay, so let's start with what are our goals? So what do we want to achieve? So at the end of the day, we want to, as always, support your ongoing operating costs, right? That is the entire objective behind the CWELC program. We, as much as we possibly can, are going to be providing the accurate funding as early as we can in the calendar year so that you can properly plan and budget. Thirdly, we want to avoid multiple funding adjustments. So if we definitely learned anything last year is that multiple funding adjustments are not fun and they are not a way to create a stable childcare sector. So we're looking to avoid multiple touches of implementing the rolling top-up adjustments. And, we also have to follow provincial rules because we're mandated to do that. So we're trying to balance, we need to follow what the province is telling us, but also minimizing the number, the frequency of changes for providers. So I am a visual person, so I like these little visual slides. So on the left of your slide, you're going to see this is what we're currently getting. So you've got so again, reflecting back to your Gov Grants, right? Your Gov Grants budget categories. You've got all of your benchmark funding, program, accommodations, all those little pieces, right? Then you'll have a budget category called legacy top-up or growth top-up. Right now, we froze those at your 2025 levels. We updated your benchmark funding for 2026, but your legacy funding has been frozen at 2025 levels. And this is because we are updating that. That's what this rolling top-up update will be. So you'll see that little arrow with the orange, right? So that part is going to change, right? So your legacy or growth top-up will become, through this process, something that will be called your rolling top-up. If you opened up a new site or new spaces in 2026, you will continue to get your growth top-up for those new spaces in 2026. That will not change. And then the fourth part is your amount in lieu of profit or surplus, because as you know, that amount of lieu of profit or surplus is directly dependent on your all those other boxes above it, because it's a percentage, right? So if there's a change in the rolling top-up, either higher or lower, there will be a corresponding change in your amount in lieu of profit, right? Either higher or lower. So that's just high level, like what you can expect to change, that the adjustments that are going to be made, even from like a budget category perspective. Okay, so now let's talk about real quickly. So who's eligible? So again, for the third time with feeling, If you are here and you are eligible for this, it is because you received 2025 legacy or growth top-ups. That's who's eligible to receive or eligible to get the rolling top-up for in 2026. So these are the folks who are going to see some adjustments. And now let's talk about, okay, what is this rolling top-up? And so to me, it's two parts. So the rolling top-up converts your 2025 funding gap into a percentage, right? So it's that ratio. We're going to show you, the mathematical kind of formula because, right, but we wanted to explain it in both words and then we'll use some math as well. So at a high level, what it does is if you, spent your funding in 2026, it makes sure that you can maintain your program and gives your legacy top up a bit of an inflationary boost. So it's making sure that your program does not experience a funding gap as a result of inflationary increases. So you'll have a ratio. So in that ratio will be set. Then we are able to multiply that ratio to your benchmark allocation moving forward. And then that's what gives you a dollar amount. So step one is we need to calculate your rolling top-up ratio. And step two, that percentage will be multiplied by your benchmark. And then that percentage will be converted into a dollar value. Right. And in the interim, while we do this, you're still receiving your legacy and growth. It will be replaced at the same time. So there'll be no gap in funding. We're just going to be replacing them simultaneously once we have the data that we need in order to do so. Okay, so why is it important? So the rolling top-up is a pretty important concept within the funding model, within the provincial funding model. And it's important because of, again, three things. So it really funds your actual costs based on your 2025 reporting. So that is kind of why, we've been really emphasizing the importance of timely submission of your audited financial statements and your reconciliation, the FAIR, because your rolling top-up will be based on those documents, right? And those costs, so your actual costs. And so it continues to support any of your program costs over and above your benchmark allocation, which for, 50% of our sector, they receive legacy, right? Because their historical program costs were higher than their benchmark allocation. And so with the establishment of the ratio, as the benchmarks increase year over year. So for example, in April, we updated the benchmarks. Everyone's funding essentially increased because all the benchmarks themselves that increased. So once we've created the rolling top-up ratio, in future years, as the benchmarks increase in alignment with, let's say, inflationary increases, that means your rolling top-up allocation will also increase. So that's the part about related to, how it's meant to maintain your funding levels and ensure that you don't have a gap in funding. Also, once you know your percentage, so once we establish a percentage, that's your program's percentage. So that will allow you to potentially predict future funding in a much easier way, right? Because then you know what your percentage is for your site will be. You'll know what the benchmark is, and maybe we might have to forecast or guess. Okay, the province is maybe going to increase it by 1.8% or 2% or 2.5%, right? And then it'll help you kind of maybe make decisions for your program that might be multi-year in nature. So it gives you a little bit of predictability, which I think will be helpful. So that's kind of why it's important to you. So let's get into my favorite, the math, which is how it's calculated. So we're going to talk about that a little bit in steps, and then we're going to show it to you like in a form, written kind of in a formula way. So step one is the step that hopefully 99.9% of the people on this call have already done, which is confirm your 2025 actual costs. So that is submission of your fare and submission of your audited financial statement. Then what step two is we will compare your 2025 cost to your 2025 benchmark funding. Right? And so that's which one's higher? Did you spend like your benchmark cost, or did you spend more than your benchmark allocation to run your program last year? That's kind of what step two is figuring out. Step three is if your actual costs are higher than your benchmark, then that percentage that is converted into a percentage, and this is what's called your rolling top-up ratio. And then, like I said, step four is then we take that percentage and we multiply it by your benchmark allocation, and that's what's going to give you your dollar value rolling top-up allocation. We're going to have a couple of examples like to kind of walk folks through. So now we'll go. So this is the same thing, just in a kind of, mathematical way. So the calculation is a visual for those who prefer to have it. Okay, so what does this mean mathematically? So your first numbers in gray, like I said, it's your actual minus your 2025 benchmark allocation. Right? Then then we divide it by your benchmark allocation, and that's how you get a rolling top-up ratio. So essentially, if you spent more, then that number will be a positive number, and that number will be your rolling top-up ratio. Then that number, that ratio you see on the second row in blue, then is multiplied again by your 2026 benchmark, and that's where you're going to. So right now, you don't have inflation on your legacy because we locked in legacy. But once we complete this step, if your program costs are higher, you'll get that inflationary bump on your legacy because we're going to be multiplying it by your 2026 benchmark allocation, which is higher. And that is how you're going to get the rolling top-up allocation. And so with this, there are two scenarios, right? And we'll get into the two scenarios. I don't want to, that's on our next slide. So I'm going to pass it along to Adrian, who's going to be walking you through that right now. And then we'll take some questions.
All right, thanks so much, Olivia. Hello, everyone. I'm a fairly new face to this forum, so I'll introduce myself. My name is Adrian Holtby. I'm an advisor with the Childcare Policy and Funding Development team. I'm going to shift the gears a little bit to talk about what the rolling top-up means for your funding. So on this slide, we're going to explain how your actual 2025 spending will affect your rolling top-up amount. A key understanding is that the final results of your 2025 CWELP reconciliation will inform your 2026 top-up ratio and allocation because it's your final reconciled expenditures that are used to calculate your 2026 rolling top-up. So if you have underspending in 2025, meaning you did not use your full allocation, you will see a reduced rolling top-up amount in comparison to last year. Alternatively, if you have fully spent your 2025 allocation, you may have a similar or slightly higher rolling top-up in 2026. And if you have overspent your 2025 allocation, the outcome will be the same as if you spent the exact amount of your funding. Overspending does not give you extra rolling top-up funding. The takeaway here is that using your allocation as intended is the best way to maintain stable funding. To do this, we encourage you to monitor your spending throughout the year and update your budget with actual expenses and updated spending forecasts for the remaining months. We'll now look at how this plays out in practice by going through a few examples of how your reported actuals can impact your rolling top-up. Okay, so here in example one, this example shows how the rolling top-up ratio works for providers who fully spent their 2025 allocation. We first start off with taking a look at the actual 2025 expenditures, which in this case is $895,000. We then use that figure and subtract from it the 2025 CWELC benchmark allocation, and in this example, it's $800,000. The difference between these two figures equates to $95,000. And this $95,000 variance is then divided by the 2025 benchmark allocation of $800,000 to get a rolling top-up ratio of 11.88%. The final step to calculating the rolling top-up amount is the application of the 11.88% to the new 2026 benchmark allocation of $816,800. And then this equates to $97,036 in a 2026 rolling top-up allocation. So the key takeaway here is that for providers who fully spent their 2025 allocation, they will see an increase to their top-up amount for 2026. Okay. Now, in the second scenario, we're looking at a provider who did not spend their full allocation in 2025. So this provider has reported that their actual expenses in 2025 was $890,000. We would then subtract from this figure their 2025 benchmark allocation, which is $800,000, and that leaves us with a difference of $90,000 this time. To determine the rolling top-up ratio, we look at the $90,000 variance as a percentage of the 2025 benchmark amount of $800,000. So that is, we divide the $90,000 by $800,000, and that gives us 11.25% for a rolling top-up ratio. And then finally, once again, to calculate the rolling top-up ratio, we use the rolling top-up amount, we use the 11.25 percentage applied to their 2026 benchmark allocation of $816,800. And that gives us a rolling top-up ratio of a rolling top-up amount of $91,890. So it's important to note that since this provider did not fully spend their 2025 allocation, their rolling top-up amount is lower than their 2025 legacy top-up. Okay, so to make sure that your funding is correctly calculated, here are a few important reminders. If you haven't already, please submit your 2025 audited financial statements as well as your FAIR and CWELC reconciliations. Please make sure that your actual costs are reported accurately at the site level, and if possible, identify and set aside any unspent funding for recovery purposes. As we move together through the reconciliation phase, we ask that you respond to any follow-up questions as promptly as possible. Timely responses help us to finalize your figures and to calculate your rolling top-up accurately. Okay, now looking ahead, we will be scheduling another teleconference in June. This June session will go into more detail on how we are implementing the rolling top-up and when you can expect to see the funding adjustments and Gov grants. So in the meantime, if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to your EYS or connect with us via email. And I thank you so much for your attention so far. I will now hand it over to Sonia to facilitate the Q&A portion of today's teleconference.